to talk about if else statements. So if else statements are basically what they sound like. The if statements we've done so far, we've said if, and then we test some conditions. So we have if, and then we were testing so we had some expression here, so we were testing to see if something was true or false. If it was true, it would execute whatever code we had after it. And so if we wanted, remember, if we just had one line, we didn't need these curly braces, so we could just have like a expression. But then if we wanted more than one line, we had to use the curly braces. So this is what we've done so far with if statements. So if this statement is true, if this expression is true, then it's going to execute whatever we have in the block or in the line after the if statement. If that expression is false, it's just going to skip that code. So what we can do is we can add an else to this. So what this is saying, if this expression is true, execute what we have here, else execute what we have here. So in other words, if our expression is false or not true, it's going to execute whatever we have in this else statement. And like the if we just have one line of code, we can just put our expression without the curly braces, but if we have more than one line, then we need the curly braces. We can do what's called a nested if. And so a nested if is basically if we want to test to see if more than one condition. And so to do that, we nest our if statement. We nest an if statement inside of an if statement. So the way that would look is right over here. So let's say if, so we have our expression. So this is our if statement, and let's say that it has an else as well, so we have our else down here. But then let's say we want to test something else, so then we can put an if statement inside of this if statement, so then we have if, and then whatever we're testing, this can also have an else statement inside of this if statement. So what we're going to do today is write a program that uses these nested if statements. So this is called a nested if. I'm sure that you guys have called tech support, like say your internet's down, and they go through their kind of annoying menu of, did you restart your computer? Did you restart the modem? Did you unplug the modem? Have you checked all the plugs? Just all the things that, like, obviously you would try before even calling them. And then at the end, they basically tell you that they don't know what the problem is. So we're going to write a program that goes through, well, and I guess, let me go back to the slides real quick. So what we're going to do is go through these questions as a nested if. So first we're going to ask, did you reboot the computer and try to connect? If the person says yes, then we're going to go down to, great, we solved the problem. But if no, so when we ask, did that fix the problem? Yes, great. No, then we're going to say, reboot the router and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Yes, great. No. Make sure the cables between the router and modem are plugged in firmly. Did that fix the problem? Yes, great. No. Move the router to a new location and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Yes, great. No, get a new router. So now let's write this program for our troubleshooting tree. So we want to write a program that's going to go through this troubleshooting tree, and we're going to use some nested if statements to do that. So I already have the comment on this, so this program leads you through the process of fixing a bad Wi-Fi connection. First thing we need to do is we're going to be asking the user yes and no questions. We can get their answer a few different ways. We can ask for yes or no. We could ask for 1 or 2, depending on if they mean yes or no. I'm just going to ask them for a Y or an N, and I'm going to specify that I want them to enter a lowercase y or n. And we're going to see later how we could make it so it doesn't matter if they enter an uppercase or a lowercase, but for now, let's just stick with lowercase. So we need a variable to hold the input, and it's going to be a character. And since, well, it's going to be a character because we're going to be asking them for either a Y or an N for yes or no. And now what we need to do, the first question is, well, the first thing we're going to tell them to do is reboot the computer and try to connect. So what we want to do is, I'm going to put a comment, so lead user through troubleshooting steps. So I'm going to print out a question to the, or I'm going to print out to the reader, or print out to the screen, reboot the computer and try to connect, because that's this first step here. So I have cout, reboot the computer and try to connect. And let's see, I'm going to do an end line here. And then the question that I have for the user is this question right here. So did that fix the problem? So I need to ask the user that. So cout, did that fix the problem? And I'm going to specify Y or N for yes or no. And I'm going to also specify, let's see, I'm just going to put this in here. So enter, I'm going to specify lowercase. And actually, I'm going to move this. So did this fix the problem? And then I'm going to specify yes or no, lowercase. And then, so I just asked the user, did this fix the problem? So the user, we need the user to answer our question now, right? So I'm going to do a cin, and I'm going to get the input from the user. So I have the character, so input, and the user is going to enter a Y, or lowercase y or n for yes or no. So the next thing on here, so did that fix the problem? So we have two different paths that we could follow depending on if that fixed the problem or not. And so we need to do an if statement. So I'm going to do if input, so is input equal to, I'm actually going to test to see if it's false, because basically if it's true, they're done. So the program is going to be done. If they enter no, then I'm going to have some statements in here that the program is going to do. And I'm going to put my else here, so else, and I'm just going to print out a note to the user, glad to be of help. And then once this goes through here, this is if the user hits no, it's going to continue on through our tree to reboot the router and try to connect. Or if it's yes, then we're done. So it'll just go down here. So else, glad to be of help, and then the program's done. So now this is where we're going to have our nested if. So if the user entered no, then we want to tell them to reboot the router and try to connect. So we're going to put that inside of this if statement where if they put no. So this is going to be cout, and I'm going to just put reboot the router and try. I'm going to go to the next line just because it's kind of going off the screen. So reboot the router and try to connect. And then this is end line. And then the next thing on this tree is we want to ask, did that fix the problem? So I'm going to see out, did that fix the problem? And then I'm going to specify again that how I want them to respond. So yes, no, lowercase. It would probably be good enough just to put yes, no, but the problem is some people might put an uppercase, and then if you haven't done something in your code, which we're going to learn how to accept either later, but for this program, it would, like say they entered an uppercase yes, it would, or, well, basically it would just go to else for anything except for the lowercase n. So they might hit an uppercase n for no, and then it says glad to be of help. So we have our, let's see, so we have our second, okay, so did that fix the problem? Now we need another if statement. So I'm gonna do if, and I want to do the same thing that I did before. So if input is equal to no, then we're going to do something. Else, let's see, this is going to be else they hit yes. So then we're going to say, then we're going to print out glad to be of help. And let's see, how did I do this on the other one? So end line. Okay, so we've written quite a bit of code now. Let's compile this and see if it's working so far. I usually like to compile things as I'm working on them, just to make sure everything looks right. Okay, so let's compile this. So this is trouble, shoot, tree, cpp-o. I'm just going to call this trouble. All right, so trouble. So this says reboot the computer and try to connect. I'm actually make this bigger. So reboot the computer and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Let's hit yes. So it says glad to be of help, and it exited. So that's what we're expecting. Now let's try no. And now it's saying reboot the router and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Yes or no? And then it exited because we haven't actually put anything in there yet. So let's get the next thing. I'm gonna go back to this slide. Okay, so the next one was make sure the cables between the router and modem are plugged in firmly. So what we want to do inside this if statement is we want to see out, and so we're right here on this tree. So make sure the cables between, I'm gonna go to the next line, between, I need a space here, between the router and modem are plugged in firmly. End line. And then we're going to ask if that fixed the problem. So I want to see out, did that fix the problem? And then I'm going to do the, I'm going to specify the yes, no, again, lowercase. And then wait for the user's response. And right here where I have, so I actually needed to include a C in here. So where I have did that fix the problem, I needed to have a C in with the user's response, so C in input. And then I need the same thing here, so C in input. So I just asked the user if that fixed the problem. And so I need another if statement asking, so I need another if statement here to see what the user's input was, right? So I'm going to have another nested if. So if, and this is going to be the same thing, so if input is equal to n, so then they're saying no. I'm going to leave that blank for a second, and I'm going to put the else, and inside the else statement, I'm going to see out glad to be of help, end line. Okay, so inside this if statement, I'm now on, so if I'm inside this if statement, the user said no, so now I'm on this part of the tree. So it says move the router to a new location and try to connect. So I'm going to see out, and I'm going to put move the router to a new location, and try to connect. And I'm going to have the end line, and then I'm going to ask them again after they do that. I'm going to say, did that fix the problem? And I'm going to have the yes. I'm going to specify how I want them to enter their response again. So then they're going to enter a response, and so I need to read in and store that response to input. And so now I'm here. I'm either going to have a yes or a no. So I need another if statement. So I'm going to have another nested if statement. So I have if input is equal to n. I'm going to leave that blank for a second. And I'm going to say else, and so else is basically if they said yes. And so then this is going to say see out glad to be of help. And then inside this if statement, this is, so I'm right here, did that fix the problem? Yes, glad to be of help. No, get a new router. So at this point, I'm going to say get a new router. Run this and see if it works right. So I'm going to compile this program again. And it compiled, so that's good. Run it. So, okay, so we're at the top of our decision tree. Reboot the computer and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Let's say yes. Glad to be of help. Program exits. Let's run it again. Reboot the computer and try to fix the problem. Did that help? No. Reboot the router and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Let's say that did. Glad to be of help. Run it again. Let's say no on the rebooting the computer didn't fix the problem. Now let's say that rebooting the router also didn't fix the problem, so we're going to say no. Now it says make sure the cables between the router and modem are plugged in firmly. Did that fix the problem? Let's say it did. Glad to be of help. Program exits. Run it again. So reboot the computer and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Let's say no this time. Did reboot the router and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Let's say no this time. Make sure the cable between the router and modem are plugged in firmly. Did that fix the problem? Let's say no. Move the router to a new location and try to connect. Did that fix the problem? Let's say yes this time. Glad to be of help. Run it again. Let's say no on all of these. So make sure the cables between the router and modem are plugged in firmly. Let's say no. Move the router to a new location and try to connect. Let's say no. Get a new router. So let's look at this code. It was kind of crammed how we were doing it because I had the stuff on both sides. So let's look at the code expanded with the nested if statements. So these nested if statements can get kind of complicated pretty quickly. And so the easiest way to write them is exactly how I did. Write your first if statement, write your if and else statement and leave code that you're going to execute if depending on if they're true or false, blank at first. So you have so what I mean by that is, let's go down here. Let's say we're writing an if statement. So we have if, and then we have something in there. And so I'm just going to leave a spot to enter what goes in that if statement. And I'm going to right away put the else in. So then I have the structure, and then I just need to go in here and fill in what goes in each if or else statement. And with these if and else statements, the easiest way to write these programs is to often write out a tree, like that decision tree that we were using to write this code. So if you have a decision tree like this that we were just looking at, this makes it really easy to go through and say, okay, this is what I need to do if this is true or if it's false, and then you can fill in your if statement from this tree. So then when you do your nested if, we have our if inside of this statement, so I write the structure for the if and right away put the else in. So basically I'm just filling in the blanks for what goes with each if and else statement. One thing I want to point out with these nested ifs, do you think would happen to the code readability if I did this? These are all on the same line like this, or like if they all start on the same column. Let me just do one more. It's now impossible to tell just by glancing at it which if statement is inside which if statement. It kind of looks like we just have 3 different if statements, and so the way this looks is it's going to look at this one, if, and it's going to see if this is true. If it's not, then it's going to go to this if statement. So it's going to check this one and then check this one. That's what it looks like it's doing, but it's not doing that because these are nested ifs. So this if statement is inside of, I'm going to move that over one more. So this if statement is inside of the first one, and then this third if statement is inside of both of them. So make sure when you're writing nested if statements that you make sure that you justify them so that so they're easily readable.